Christopher Hitchens is here. He is a contributing editor to Vanity Fair magazine, also writes a monthly column for the Atlantic Monthly. He has written a dozen books, including A Long Short War and Why Orwell Matters. His new book is called Thomas Jefferson, Author of America. I am pleased to welcome Christopher back to this table, and it is a pleasure for me. And I just want to know, you did not want to be the only, this is your words, you did not want to be the only author in America who'd never written about Thomas Jefferson.
That's right. If you have to write a book about Thomas Jefferson if you hope for any position in society.
Yeah, or you'll never be in the Academy Français will never accept you if you've never written about it.
I would never have dared propose myself for this book.
Yeah.
But when an editor called and said, would I like to do it, I realized I couldn't refuse, because if you write about America, which is the great subject, you're always writing about it. TJ, he's in all of our conversations. Yeah. I thought it's time I made my own sort of...
What is it about Americans, you think, and the Founding Fathers? They're just interesting people?
It's a remarkable is a cheap, easy term for it.
It's
an extraordinary
It's a word
fact.
that's not worthy to
It's
the...
an extraordinary fact. There are a couple of occasions in history. I suppose 5th century Athens is one. The group of people who were brought together to compose the King James Bible, the only decent book ever written by a committee, is another. And those who convened in Philadelphia, a city, the first city in the New World to be a city of the Enlightenment, of science and medicine and reason, comparable to the French philosophe. It's all new and it's all ready, and they have a whole continent to practice it on. And Franklin and Madison and Jefferson and Hamilton, these minds. Thomas Paine, my personal favorite actually, Thomas Paine, child of and fighter for the English Revolution and British Enlightenment, wafting across the Atlantic with a letter, just carrying a letter from Ben Franklin saying, be nice to this guy. All of them getting Benjamin Rush. Joseph Priestley now discovers oxygen.
You like Paine because of the power of his ideas, or because of the power of his pen?
Partly because he's my model for Englishmen in America. Fantastic pen, and because he shows that Age of Reason and Rights of Man are the same thing. You can't have Rights of Man without an Age of Reason, in fact. And because I think he's the first person to use the word democratic as a compliment. John Adams used the word democratical as an insult, for example. Most people did. Edmund Burke did. Paine says, no, Democrat is a good word.
Thomas Jefferson, you've written more books than Thomas Jefferson ever wrote, this great writer.
No, well, that's
yes, it's true. Thomas Jefferson never wrote a book. One, I think. One.
Well, no, he wrote a great deal.
He wrote a great deal of things, but mostly letters.
Yes, it's true.
One book, as far as I know.
I guess, well, I think maybe we could say 3. 2, well, Notes on the State of Virginia, wonderful but rather worrying book about economy and society in Virginia.
Right.
His own autobiography, and his own version of the New Testament, the Jefferson Bible, which he did by snipping out. He snipped out all the ludicrous bits from the New Testament.
And how good is his own autobiography?
It's not very good at all.
That's what I heard.
No, I mean, it's a thing you have to encounter when you're dealing with him. This is a very cold guy in some ways, rather solitary, almost no sense of humor, very ruthless, very single-minded.
Did you excuse him for not having a sense of humor?
It's very hard to do. He thought Sterne's Tristram Shandy was a hysterically funny novel. I mean,
and you couldn't believe it.
He would read it aloud to his wife and would laugh when she read it back to him.
In bed, I think I read.
I mean, it's a really bleak scene. Not without wit, but without humor. It's also a very forbidding figure in some
You
way.
also suggest he's a great compromiser.
Yes.
At everything.
Yes, but not just in his own self-interest. Not a great triangulator.
For the country he wanted to see.
If he thought it would enlarge the power and reach of the United States, there was nothing he wouldn't do. In other words, he really believed one should always consult Congress on major matters, especially if they involve spending. But he committed them without telling them, to remove the pirate slave states from North Africa and send the fleet to finish them off. And he cheated them. He on the Lewis and Clark expedition and the Louisiana Purchase by basically trying to raise the money privately. It's fantastically unconstitutional. So we'll need the money to bribe the French. We'll need the money to finance the expedition. We'll smuggle it through Congress under another name. And people will, when they realize what we've done, they'll approve it.
What did you like most about him?
His contempt for religion, I think.
Something you share.
Yes. His scorn for faith and for what he would have called superstition and for organized religion, and his respect for it in that he said everyone must be allowed to practice any form of it that they wish, but that must not involve the government. They must not try and involve state power for the spreading of the
Yeah,
idea.
but did he
The
have...
Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom is the foundation of the First Amendment.
Okay, but wait, it's one thing to want to see a separation of state and church. It's another thing to have contempt for church.
Sure.
Suggests he had contempt for church?
You don't
or
have
he just
to have
did not believe it should have influence on state?
In order to be secular, you don't have to be agnostic, or let alone atheist or anti-theist.
Was he any of those?
But I'm impressed by the fact that for his time he was unusually scornful and skeptical of religion's claims. He didn't really believe them. He faced his own death very sternly and said, I'm approaching it with neither hope nor fear, which means it can't have been a Christian.
Right, that's agnostic then.
Yeah. May have been a deist of some kind, flirted with Unitarianism, really despised the Presbyterians, particularly despised them. They were the strongest faction in Virginia.
Because of
really
destiny and all that predestiny stuff?
Yes, because of their cruel Calvinistic theology, and because of their greed, their desire to be maintained by the public purse. I think that when he was towards the end of his life, and he died very lucid, no priest anywhere near the bedside, nothing on the headstone, none of this, quite extraordinary.
Who was there?
Sally Hemings was there.
Was she really?
Yes, she was. Well, she was his wife's half-sister, remember?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. A lot of people don't know it, but I mean, Sally Hemings had the same father as Martha Jefferson. So we already know some of what's going on the old plantation, and she comes to him as a gift from his deceased father-in-law, and she's a privileged house servant who's already... Whose grandfather is also white.
She had gone to Paris with him, had she?
She went to Paris to bring his daughter over, yes.
Yeah.
And slavery wasn't legal on French soil. That's where they met properly.
Is that where they started whatever relationship they had, or was?
I believe so. Yes. I mean, I think it must have started
very young
there.
then, though, wasn't she? Like
15. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
I mean, borderline from what we would think of as legitimate, but grown enough to be given charge of his daughter to cross the Atlantic on her own with.
Yeah.
Obviously not a child.
Where are you in terms of American foreign policy? Supported military action in Kosovo, supported military action in Iraq. You seem to believe, have come to this not because of Iraq and not because of neoconservatives and all that they have written about regime change and everything else, and the promotion of democracy. You seem to have come from this because of a hatred of dictators. What's your philosophy?
You put it very flatteringly to me.
How would you put it?
Well,
less flatteringly.
That's what I wish people would conclude. I mean, I decided after the Cold War was over, we thought maybe we now can start to dismantle the weapons and spend some more money on the Third World and all of that. Remember the peace dividend, and it lasted for, if you count the fall of the Berlin Wall as November '89, it lasted for about 120 days, this illusion. So then Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. Slobodan Milosevic invades Bosnia.
Right.
Ruins our new scheme. Of course. How could I have been so naive? Cooperation with, coexistence with, totalitarian, expansionist, one-man state, one-God state ideologies is impossible. And that's good, because it's not desirable. It's us or them. It'll be them. Even more true, of course, of jihadism and of Talibanism and Kim Il-sungism. I mean, there isn't enough room on the planet for us and them. And that's what they think. That's what they think and say, and they're right.
They being, there's a linkage between all of these people, or they just worship the same ideology?
There is a linkage, oddly enough. For example, when Saddam Hussein was slaughtering the Muslim, when Slobodan Milosevic was slaughtering the Muslims of Bosnia, he had support and weapons from Saddam Hussein, the alleged leader of Muslim feeling.
Well, but was
it
just simply a mercenary act rather than a political act?
Actually, their militaries had also both had a parasitic relationship with the old Soviet Union. As it happens, they both welcomed the attempted overthrow of Gorbachev. Remember that coup when it looked for a while as if Gorbachev was gone. Both the Baathists and the Serbian socialists both applauded that. There is a subconscious connection, and it's bonded by anti-Americanism, and has that in common, of course, with jihad in its purest form, the Bin Ladenist and Taliban lot, and with the post-Stalinism, the sort of crazed Kim Il-sungist world.
What's the solution to the fact that this regime has nuclear weapons and may do a nuclear test in the near future and is unlikely to stop their program.
All three of the axis of evil countries, which
Iran,
until your guest this
North
evening,
Korea.
until your guest this evening came on, he's now joined me as the second one to have been to all three. To Iran, Iraq, and
North Korea. Yeah,
all three of them have tried
the
to
harder one is North
project their failed states, their failed regimes, and their discredited ideologies. They've tried to postpone the reckoning of this by buying themselves insurance through weapons of mass destruction, one way or another. One of them's now been disarmed. I know a lot of people complain about this and say he was disarmed already, but in fact, we didn't know he was disarmed until he was removed, and I think both things were good to certify.
Notwithstanding how bad it's going and the strength of the insurgency and all of that.
Well, knowing how bad the enemy is isn't an undermining of my position. I mean,
nothing has caused...
Now that you can see Baathism and jihadism linked arms, doing indiscriminate mass murder and sabotage, I mean, do you think that proves me wrong? I think it proves surely that we were right to say that this was a necessary confrontation. What are we to do now? Walk away from that? No. We've seen what we feared, which was the alliance of Baathism and jihadism. And don't let anyone tell you, Charlie, that
But is the
Bush
alliance,
created
is that alliance because we went there, or was that alliance that came as a result of our presence?
It shows that it was pre-existing. Mr. Zarqawi was in Iraq long before the invasion, and come from Afghanistan, from the next camp over to Osama bin Laden, who he now considers his leader.
Yeah, right.
He's not an Iraqi. I know Iraq well enough to tell you this much. In those days, no one of that importance could get into the country or out of it without permission of the leadership.
Well, how important was he at that time?
Very.
He was?
Well, the Saudis, if you remember...
Zarqawi, was that important when he came in for...
The Saudis and the Pakistanis were expelling people like him. Even the Saudis and the Pakistanis after 9/11. Iraq was inviting them in. What does that tell you? Iraq, as it had done the man, Mr. Yassin, who'd blown up the World Trade Center in 1993. We're still looking for on Iraqi soil, which is where he's been for 12 years after trying to destroy our downtown. Come on.
You have been all your life engaged in disputation since Oxford. Now you come to
before Oxford.
Before Oxford, okay. You come to America and have been writing about culture and a series of lots of essays about culture, including the famous foreword to the, I guess it was the 50th anniversary of Augie March. Was that when you wrote about that? And yes. A lot of other things. And you have been in the forefront of sort of supporting the administration in terms of Iraq and in terms of the regimes like Saddam Hussein. What's the operative philosophy? Because you have said some interesting things about globalization, which is about production, needs to be matched in terms of a certain kind of standard of decency and behavior. Help me understand the ideological or intellectual underpinnings and the architecture for how you make decisions about policy.
Well, you promise you won't think it's opportunist of me because I have a book
coming out on this.
But the word Jeffersonian wouldn't be too bad for this. In other words, the Russian Revolution is over. It's no longer a model for anybody. The Chinese Revolution is over. No longer a model for anybody.
Right.
The Cuban Revolution is...
But the Chinese Revolution turned out all right.
On the vine. Well, it's only by mutating into its opposite,
exactly.
Metamorphosing it. Yeah. Cuban Revolution is dead in the water, as we all know. I wouldn't say that the ideas of 1789 in France were by any means gone, but Jefferson helped to write the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of France too.
Influenced by the French Revolution.
And the American... In effect, therefore, the only revolution which has a chance of being worth emulating, worth studying for other countries, was pluralism, religious freedom, separation, secular separation, and the right of anyone to try and make a living their own way and worship their own God. May not sound very grandiose, but it's not bad, and will serve. And most of the countries I've been to in the past few years would all be taking a step up if they moved in that direction, and most of them know it. So to discover that, after it's all shaken out, that the American Revolution still has some life and purpose and meat and muscle in it, is, I think, a rather inspiring thing for someone of my age. I didn't think I'd have another chance to take part in a revolution. And now, in fact, the United States is involved in a combat that is Jeffersonian around the world.
But there's interesting splits of how people... But the reason I want you to articulate, a lot of people, I mean, you see a whole range of people who are intelligent and come to this show a lot, people like Ignatieff, people like, comes less, but David Reef and a whole range of people, who were engaged by Sarajevo and engaged by Bosnia and Kosovo, and have been engaged, coming and splitting on the question of Iraq.
Sure.
They were almost in unity on Bosnia and Kosovo.
And Michael Ignatieff, certainly for a while at least, on Iraq. I'm not sure what his position now is.
I think his position didn't go as the way he thought he wanted it to go, well, but I think he still
sure didn't go the way I wanted it to either.
Right.
But the principle is this: they thought it was optional, and they also said that I thought it was optional. In other words, it was a war of choice.
Right.
I thought, but both those points were mistaken. We were in fact responsible for Iraq already. It was broken, and we had inherited it, and it did belong to us.
Now, are you having more fun with politics today, or more driven to write about politics than you are about our culture and literature?
I'd still rather write about literature and culture, because I think this is a war about civilization. It may not be a clash
you're not quite
of civilizations, but it's a clash about civilization, and it's a clash with people who think you only need one book.
Okay, but define me what the clash is for me one more time, even though we've talked around it all day. This is a war.
It's a civil war within the Muslim world, where those who believe in the restoration of the Islamic Caliphate and the imposition of Sharia law and the reading of only one book, in fact the memorizing of only one book as a mantra, want to enslave their Muslim brothers and sisters and make them all...
But that's their fight, isn't it? That's not our fight.
No, because we might conceivably want to be neutral about this, though I don't think we could be for long, but those who want the jihadist Sharia victory have decided that they'll make their point by exporting the war to our soil, which they have dramatically done.
Sure, on 9/11.
And so we now have, I think, a consumingly strong interest in making certain that the civil war within Islam, actually there's more than one, but the civil wars within Islam are not one.
Yeah.
Not the victors are not
one
the
of the central criticisms.
fanatics.
One of the central criticisms is that, for the lack of a better word, and I wish there was a better word, that civil war, one side has not done a very good job of fighting its war. That is the side who's fighting against the fundamentalists and the radicals. They have not done a good job in making their battle.
No, they have not.
So-called moderates.
They have not. There are forces who've put up a pretty brave fight. I mean, the Kurdish militia in northern Iraq, for example, are all Sunni, but they've been resisting jihadism as well as Baathism for a long time. They'll never agree to live under it. It's been impossible to subdue them. There are numerous secular forces in the rest of the region, and there are people we haven't heard about yet who will find their voice. And I think even if they don't want to say thank you, they'll have to admit that the United States intervention was a help to them.
But are you and Amos best friends?
He's not my best friend; he's my only friend.
He's your only friend?
Yeah. I have no only acquaintances. Want to be friends?
No, I'm fascinated by this. Define it for me then.
Well,
why is it different?
Someone who I really love and would consider laying down the life for doesn't come along very often. Someone who knows everything about you, who understands everything you say. I mean, you're asking because we had a quarrel over Stalin.
No, I'm not. I'm really asking because I like him a lot and like you a lot.
He's a great guy.
That's why. Were you classmates at Oxford?
No, we weren't actually. We didn't meet till we were in London in the early 70s.
The whole group of...
I met him at Oxford briefly, but he was a year behind me, in fact.
Christopher Hitchens, Thomas Jefferson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.